Hey there friends! Before I get into the video, I just want to thank you all for the support on the classes video I put out a couple days ago. For a smaller AOC channel, or just a YouTube channel in general I guess, the responses I got was absolutely amazing, and I really enjoyed talking with you on both here and on the subreddit. I really look forward to the future of the channel, and being able to engage with such an amazing community. And what better way to do that than to commit absolute career suicide and take on one of the most divisive topics of our time. Clearly, I am talking about climate change. No, damage meters. Obviously. The topic of damage meters has plagued communities, toppled friendships, and even gone as far as destroying families. With as little as one like and one prayer, we can help each of those poor souls affected by this travesty. Yeah, that's not how I actually feel, but I figured I'd try to crack a few smiles before getting into this with everybody because this has been so heated the past couple weeks that I've seen on the forums. This shouldn't really need to be said, but this video is nothing more than my personal opinion on the debate, whether allowing damage meters or not, combat trackers or not, and ashes specifically. So if you agree or disagree, that's awesome. That means you have your own opinion, but just please try to be respectful. I just can't wait to get downvoted to the deepest, darkest, fiery pits of YouTube hell for this, but I guess I'm a masochist, so let's just get into it. This is not a right or wrong situation, a black and white scenario. There are usually three sides to every story, and this honestly is no different. As with all discussive forums and conversations that involve more than one side of an argument, it's important that we identify each one, and we're able to actually articulate what is being said from all sides. Now I bring this up because this is why I feel we are so divided when it comes to measuring performances through any kind of analytical methods and metrics when it comes to games. Sometimes when we discuss things that we're passionate about, we forget to do one key thing, which is being able to bring an objective attitude to the table. This poisons the conversation because we inject our own personal biases and we forfeit any kind of solution or objective solution, really. Now, instead these conversations end up with both sides just talking at each other, not with each other, and it loses all sense of intention to progress forward with the conversation. And even worse, most of the time, developers and game designers are looking to us, the community, for answers or feedback, and yet they're just left scratching their heads because both sides bring up great points, sure, but most of the time they don't really offer any objective result. As you can imagine, at this point, both sides are left absolutely exhausted and annoyed by the conversation. This is what I see happening time and time again when this discussion comes up. Now note, specifically for the Ashes community, we've been pretty good about providing options on both sides, but there still has been a lot of talking at each other back and forth and just kind of throwing these blank, passive-aggressive posts back and forth at each other that doesn't really mean anything. So instead of just giving you my opinion, I'm going to break down exactly what the argument is, what's being said on both sides, and then I'll get into my thoughts. So at its core, the debate of allowing damage meters or combat trackers comes down to asking one basic question. Should developers allow performance metrics and analytical systems into the game? That's pretty much it. Now, with this, we have to start looking at a few different things. First, these are usually third-party applications. Someone out there creates these and provides them to the community to use, because usually developers don't do it themselves. Second, these are usually not personal metrics, which means that these meters or combat trackers, they usually tell you everybody else's performance as well as your own. Lastly, the output of these results are just in the form of basic numbers and percentile ranges, which are called parses. Now, taking all this into account, let's push forward and let's try to get to the bottom of what the big deal is, what the big division is between the community. Now first, let's take a look at the argument for damage meters. And I didn't pick 4 damage meters because that's my opinion. It's just I'm going down the list, so there's no real reason why I'm picking damage meters first. Primarily, this side of the argument can be reduced down to one simple notion. Some players want to be able to simplify damage per second or overall damage performance in-game to a quantitative result that can be used to determine how their performance measures up to their peers, their fellow gamers, etc. And with combat trackers, it's not only damage or DPS, it's other things included, which I'll go over in a second. What this means, as players pew pew more, the meter gives them a DPS range, say like 15,000 DPS, and a percentile or parse gives them like a 90%, right? This tells them that they are performing in the top 10% of every other person of that class. So not in the game, but of that class at the 15,000 DPS level. With this data, these players can analyze builds, rotations, see how to optimize their own gameplay to maximize either their damage output or just to beat the encounter in either the best possible time or the most efficient way. Now, to take this a step further, there are also combat tracking apps like I mentioned. There's one specifically that I like to use whenever I play like Final Fantasy XIV, for example, and it's called ACT. It gives you a bit more information than just DPS output. It's really helpful for whenever you're stuck on an encounter, for example. It's used in the same way, but it tells you things like who's taking unnecessary damage. So maybe someone's standing in mechanics, and as a raid leader, that is important because you want to know who knows how to do the fight. If you go into an encounter and someone says they know how to do it, and you're stuck there doing it for 3 hours and can't figure out why you can't get past phase 1, but you look at, the combat tracker and sees this person is taking 90% more damage than everybody else, it might not be the reason why, but it could be a contributing factor. But again, it comes down to how responsible you are with, coaching and all that sort of stuff. It also tells you things like who heals the most. It tells you who dispels the most. It tells you who buffs when it's appropriate. Stuff like that. Now, for these players, being able to understand their performance on a basic level is absolutely fundamental to their enjoyment of whatever game they're playing. And to be honest, again, this isn't tied directly to my opinion, but isn't it just a natural state of things? By nature, we just tend to have certain curiosities, and we just tend to be generally more interested in simplifying things down to a very understandable level. That's basically how science was invented. In the middle of difficult encounters, it's almost impossible to see what's going on with everyone in the raid, especially when damage is flying left and right. You're focusing on your own rotation, you're focusing on mechanics. It's even more unreasonable to provide feedback to people in the raid, especially if you're so focused on what's going on for yourself. This is what this end of the argument is saying. This is the stance that anybody on this side of the argument is essentially taking, that these damage meters and trackers, it does nothing more than provide them a platform. It is nothing more than a tool to use to coach their group, raid, or guild members, and in some situations, holding them accountable for their individual performance. This is how they choose to play the game. Now, on the opposite side of the fence, they don't want any damage meters, performance metrics, third-party add-ons in their game at all. The reasonings vary, but the most popular ones that I have gathered from both the Ashes forums and, you can pretty much name any other game forum in existence that I've looked at. They've dealt with toxicity and elitism when DPS meters or combat trackers were involved. People have used DPS meters or combat trackers to push an agenda to either remove or bench a member for a raid or group when that wasn't the primary motive. Okay, that's kind of human nature. Some think it gives distorted information because there are other things involved in difficult encounters outside DPS, and if they're referring to combat trackers, the complaint is that most people don't know that combat trackers can track other things other than DPS, so they give them either false coaching or false information. So far from what I've seen, most of this can be boiled down to these individuals have encountered some form of toxicity, and no one has been able to actually use it in a way that improves their gameplay. Also, some of these voices echo the same notion. They want to experience the game without having any efficiency systems, such as DPS meters, add-ons, stuff like that, because it's going to make their experience more enjoyable for them. And now these players, this is the stance that they're taking, and this is how they choose to play the game. Okay, with both sides out in the open now, it's clear that there are many who use the DPS meters and combat trackers as a way just for self-improvement, or they use it in an environment that all members consent to using it as a way to try to build their group up, build their strategy up, and just overall get better at an encounter, or just as players in general. On the other side, it seems that there are also a significant amount of people who use it in a toxic manner to either belittle or ridicule others within the group or community. Some also use it to analyze performance of builds, to see which ones offer the most DPS utility, healing utility, raid utility, stuff like that, and then they go and they post these builds online for all of us to follow. Some parts of the community value the mystery behind builds. They don't want to know what's laid out for them. They want to be able to go in and discover them for themselves. They don't want these metrics to tell them before they even pick it up. Either way, both sides seems to think that it's their quote-unquote right to either have or not have these things in the game. Now to this, I just want to kind of lay down the foundation of what I believe for this. If developers make a statement that DPS meters, combat trackers, add-ons, etc. are not allowed, then it's pretty clear that you do not have the right to have them specifically, and it's left up to your discretion whether you want to chance that or not. It's not officialized by the game. On the flip side, if a game makes it clear that third-party add-ons are welcome, like say for example like World of Warcraft, then it's not your right to exactly take it away from others. Now I'm not saying that this is my stance, again, technically on whether I actually agree with them being in the game or not, but I know Steven has said that he doesn't like them, and as of right now, he's not going to include them in the game. However, he did say that there were going to be ways that you could measure your performance. Now, with that said, I'm not naive enough to think that people won't come up with something because they always will, but this is just how I see it. Now, before I get into my thoughts, I want to start by saying this. If you play in a game that specifically states in the terms of service that third-party add-ons are not to be used, no DPS meters, no combat trackers or nothing, and none of that stuff is implemented into the game, then to me, logically, it's safe to assume that developers don't want those systems in the game. And if they do, they'll come out and they'll say that they want the community to collaborate. Now, this is not always the case, like say Final Fantasy XIV, but the difference is, by and large, that community is probably the most responsible community I have ever seen in an MMO. Most people that use the combat tracker are the highest end raiders, and the people that try to use it maliciously are almost instantly taken care of. Second, if you're one of those people who don't see the issue with ridiculing people, or not necessarily calling people out, but doing it in a very aggressive way, just to either flex on people or any other notion like that, in a game that's supposed to be their escape from reality, then I feel like you're the reason why we have to have this conversation, and you deserve the inevitable ban that you're going to get. Plain and simple. I don't think this really needs to be said or argued, but I've seen this go back and forth that this is not what we're actually arguing. There's an underlying issue that I'm going to be going over in a second with my opinion. So I just wanted to get this out of the way. Okay, so now my opinion. It honestly comes down to how the game is being developed, how the boss fights are going to work, how the raids are going to work, what mechanics look like, etc. Again, like I said at the beginning, this is not a black and white situation. You can't just come out and say, oh, forever damage meters can't be included, or forever damage meters have to be included. That is an unreasonable way to approach any kind of situation. I personally have used DPS meters and combat trackers in most of the games that I've played, and I do it in a responsible manner with responsible groups. I've never used it to ridicule anyone, and yes, it has been a way for me and my group to get past encounters that we otherwise would not have been able to because we didn't have the metrics available to us. And I think that is the most important thing. I think it should be the responsibility of the developers to include these things in the game, because in the end, the development of third-party applications is nothing more than a failure on the development cycle of the game. We have to create things for ourselves that otherwise we can't get in the game that we think is fundamental to our gameplay. Additionally, I have also seen how these very things have destroyed communities and created such a toxic and bullyish environment that it inevitably does the exact opposite of what it's intended to do. It demotivates so many people from even attempting to get into more difficult content. And what does that do for an MMO? It pretty much kills it for the endgame. I think if Intrepid Studios creates boss fights where DPS matters, where there are going to be damage checks, they need to provide those ways of measuring performance in the game and officialize the use of those tools. Also, they need to find a way to do it so that you can't just be toxic in nature with it. And I know that sounds like that's not possible, but I have a few suggestions that might help. For example, why not create practice dummies that have specific health pools and simulate a DPS phase of a boss. This would allow players to go in solo, they don't have to be with people, go in with different builds, they can test them, they can see if they can actually take down the practice dummy within the allotted time. Final Fantasy XIV does this and it works perfectly. They do it for their Savage Raids, which Savage Raids are nothing more than high-end raiding content. If you don't do enough damage, you will fail the damage test and the dummy will just disappear. And you can just go back in and try again. This doesn't quantify anything. It doesn't give you any sort of calculation. It doesn't rate you on a scale of 1 to 10. But what it does tell you is, are you ready for this encounter? Do you have the gear for the encounter? Again, this is only a DPS check, so you need to balance this with managing mechanics, and that comes with a little bit more practice, but it's still left up to the player. How about another suggestion? Let's take this a step further and go outside of the traditional MMOs. Have you ever played a game called Destiny 2? Why not have an end screen or something that tells you how you did with certain metrics whenever you go into a dungeon, raid, or a fight? This would retain the integrity of the metric system being portrayed in the game and allow the community to collaborate on best practices for fights. All in all, I would love if Intrepid Studios would just include their own system to avoid having third-party apps, because every time I play these games and I feel like I have to use one, I always have one just running in the corner of my screen. On the other hand, if they want the experience to be more explorative, they want players to figure it out for themselves, they want this to be a very old school MMO experience that I think they've pretty much come out and said that they want it to be, I'm not going to be upset about it. At the end of the day, this is a game that if I enjoy playing it, this is not going to ruin the experience for me, but that's just me. To conclude, I honestly see both sides of the argument. Like I said before, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this debate. In the end, it just comes down to how the community treats each other. We have to be responsible if we are going to use these sort of tools. If we're good to each other, we try to help each other in the best way that we can. I don't see the issue with using things like this. However, other than Final Fantasy XIV's community and maybe a few other communities in the past, I have yet to see a community act so responsibly that it actually hasn't caused more issues than it's solved. So how about this? Whether we get meters or not, whether we get combat trackers or not, whether we get the ability to use add-ons or not, let's just be good to each other. Let's foster a community we can all be proud of. And if we can manage to do that above all else, as far as I'm concerned, that's a win in my book. Whew. All right, well, this took me some time to gather my thoughts and go through the comments and jump between other game forums and really flesh this out. So if you watch this all the way through, you're awesome. Next, I should have my races video dropping for this series, probably either later this week or depending on my workload early next week, so look forward to that. If you liked the video or you didn't like it, let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.